Do you have any reason to doubt that?
I don't.
And in your opinion, who is best suited to provide an expert opinion about shaken baby syndrome or abusive head trauma in infants? A clinical practitioner such as Dr. Stein, or someone who is, for instance, a biomechanical engineer or a law professor?
Before this testimony even begins, understand what's at stake here. This isn't just a medical debate, it's a life or death legal battle. A child has suffered devastating injuries, and the court must now answer one critical question. Was this a tragic accident or something far more intentional? You're about to hear expert testimony that challenges common assumptions about shortfalls, shaking, and brain trauma. And trust me, what's said here could completely reshape how you see this case. Pay close attention because small details in this testimony could make a massive difference in the final outcome.
Living or deceased patient?
Well, that's a great distinction. I mean, as far as a deceased patient, I suspect I know what your answer will be.
I'm going to be for the home team. I would say a forensic pathologist would be best positioned. We would obviously work with clinicians. So an ICU doc sees these kids acutely while they're alive. So certainly a valuable source of information, and absolutely somebody who is alive, I'm going to listen to what they have to tell me. But after, unfortunately, passed away, then that's my area.
All right, makes sense. Let's move on to the reports or information provided by Dr. Patricia Moore. She concluded that, quote, some type of direct force to the head, whether it be a shaking mechanism involved or not, there was some type of acceleration injury to cause these problems in the brain and the eyes. You agree, disagree, take issue with that?
I agree, because there has to be some way to get this devastating injury. And without anything external, acceleration, deceleration is the only mechanism to account for it.
And when asked during the trial if these injuries were consistent with a closed head trauma due to shaking, her answer was yes. You agree, disagree, based on what you reviewed in the entirety of the file?
I agree. It would be consistent with shaken baby syndrome, as we termed it then.
And when asked at the trial whether or not this would have an immediate effect on the child, her answer was yes. And let me also add to this question, this whole concept of lucid intervals. If you can speak to not only whether or not you agree with her answer, but the controversy, if any, out there about lucid intervals.
So generally speaking, these injuries are devastating. It's apparent right away there's something wrong. What oftentimes happens is there's a delay in getting treatment for the child. So the child sits there and becomes more hypoxic and more ischemic. So more damage to the brain from those processes that are ongoing. Lucid interval, we are familiar with that with some types of head injuries. I can't say it doesn't happen, but it's very unusual. It would be an outlier.
You mentioned a delay in seeking treatment exacerbating the injury. Are you aware, if you recall from your review of this file, if there was a delay in seeking treatment in this case?
I believe there was.
I think that's about all on your affidavit. Let's talk about something that I suspect counsel for the applicant may want to inquire about, and that's how you are compensated. You're being paid for your expert testimony here today, correct?
I'm being paid for my time.
Yes, sir. And that's in the amount of $500 an hour, correct?
That's correct.
Plus your expenses.
That's correct.
Is that unusual for this type of situation or expert testimony?
Not at all.
And has the payment of your hourly fee and or your expenses in any way influenced your testimony today?
No, sir. I don't testify for a side. I testify for the truth. The truth doesn't have a side. I don't care which side is asking a question. I'm going to give them the same answer.
Very good. And do you, just to shore this up, do you or a close family member have a personal interest or stake or financial stake in the outcome of this case?
No, sir, not at all.
And in fact, you've signed a disclosure, a conflict of interest disclosure form, correct?
Yes, sir.
And I think the next topic here in my outline are case studies and clinical research studies. I think I'm going to cut that down, maybe delete it altogether. The judge has heard plenty about that from the previous witnesses. Just
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me just see if there's anything in here that really lends itself to your area of expertise. Give me a second. Well, would you agree with this statement by the applicant's expert witness, the Dr. John Galasnik? You're familiar with Dr. Galasnik, correct?
I am.
With that he made on Monday, his sworn testimony was that there are hundreds of studies out there regarding shaken baby syndrome and or abusive head trauma. Would you agree with that?
That's fair.
That all studies aren't created equal. You would agree?
Oh, definitely.
All right, I'll just leave it at that. The judges are plenty of testimony on that. Dr. Glansnick also testified that for there to be legitimate shaken baby syndrome, there needs to be either a broken neck, a rib fracture, or some ligament damage. What are your thoughts? What's your take on it?
Well, actually, at one point in time, I would say there were a number of people in my community that felt the same way. In fact, I spent time looking at that specific question because people that thought there would be neck damage, they're really smart. So if they're right, I'm wrong. So why am I wrong? So I actually developed a technique of dissecting children's necks in shaken baby cases. And what I discovered in 100% of my cases, I found fresh blood and old blood indicating prior injury to where the spinal cord attaches inside the vertebrae. Now, other people have found lesser numbers, but in my experience, I believe that's real, and I believe it's a trauma that we don't normally see at autopsy because people don't normally do that dissection.
And part of what the judge is tasked with from the Court of Appeals is making a determination about whether or not certain science was available at the time of this particular trial. Is this what you're testifying to? Some new concept or scientific?
The concept of the spinal nerve ganglia.
Yeah.
I started doing that, I think, in about 96. It probably didn't get published until the early 2000s, but certainly I was doing presentations on this in the 90s.
And along that vein, with regard to shaken baby syndrome in general, or abusive head trauma of infants in general, I mean, while there is this new theory of the mechanism that causes it, the science underlying that's shaken baby.
I'm sorry, a new theory of mechanism?
Yeah, the theory of mechanism meaning the shortfall or either something that mimics or maybe a rebleed, all of these things under this quote unquote new science, that may be a new theory of the mechanism.
I wouldn't say it's a new theory of a mechanism. We've had that stuff as long as I can remember. People have said you can get this from shortfalls. There's nothing new here. This packaging it up and painting it a different color doesn't change that we've thought about all this from the very beginning. I know when I was in training in the 80s and early 90s, I had cases, and I remember going through a differential that included things like falls, trauma. That's why the absence of trauma history is important. And that's really how you practice medicine. You use a diagnostic triad of history, physical, and lab testing, other testing. That is a diagnostic triad. Some people, when they're talking about shaken baby syndrome.
And I think I know where you're headed. We're going to get to that triad.
Okay.
That's part of my outline. But I think I want to circle back to something you just said about the concept of something being at least thought of or considered out there, at least in the world, in the sphere of what these cases were about. If that's your testimony, this is not these mechanisms are not something quote unquote new, so much as they were already around, being thought of, at least being conceptualized.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Ambrose Tardieu in the 1800s, 1870s, 1880s, first came up with the concept of shaken baby syndrome. You'll see a lot of people attribute it to other authors in the 70s, and they did write about it, but the concepts start back in the 1800s.
But I want to be clear. I'm not talking about the concept of shaken baby syndrome or the concept of abusive head trauma. And it was a hard concept for me to wrap my brain around. There is the mechanism that leads to the diagnosis, leads to the injuries and the diagnosis of shaken baby. Now, what I'm thinking of and what my question is, has that mechanism, the mechanism being either shortfall or some ailment that mimics shaken baby, or either any of those things, that is it fair to say that that's been advanced here recently or quote unquote new?
Some people have said it's new. I think the only serious disagreement or question is whether it requires an impact or not. Certainly, it's much easier to damage a brain with an impact. I don't think anybody will dispute that. The question is, can shaking alone cause these injuries? And most of the cases have an impact, so it's really not hard.
Thank you, Dr. Downs. Biomechanical modeling, this judge has heard quite a bit about that. I'm not going to spend much time on it. In your affidavit, you saw fit to characterize relying on biomechanical modeling as malpractice.
I think there was more to the sentence than that.
Please elaborate.
To the exclusion of reality. That is, modeling is great. It's a tool. It's a wonderful, powerful tool, but it should not supplant reality. If there's some issue between agreement of reality and the model's flawed. So we're getting there. We don't have perfect models. They have to make assumptions. They have to do things like scale, which is take a low force on a little model and make that bigger because a human being is bigger than a rat. And they have to do things like switch from considering rat brains to considering human infant brains. So there's some assumptions that are made that are important to understand the whole process.
I mean, things like the details matter. Things like the strength of the neck muscles of an infant. I mean, that needs to be quantified. It needs to be taken.
I mean, take that. That's a really good example. It's not only the strength of a child's neck muscles compared to a lamb's neck muscles. You anesthetize the lamb, so they don't have the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system that's going to stimulate the body. You have basically put them to sleep. Well, in a human being, in the real world, you haven't done that. And that's an important remember that the research may constrain or limit how the head moves. That's not reality. So all of those things are critically important when you're reading papers. There's great research out there, but we aren't there yet.
And I want to keep circling back to what was available, at least in thought, or at least in the common consciousness back in the early 2000s. And I want to make sure that because again, that's part of what the judge is tasked with, determining whether or not there's quote unquote new science out there. At least what you just testified to about whether or not it's an apples to apples comparison with biomodeling technology or science. Was that a concept in the early 2000s?
I really couldn't tell you. I'm not a biomechanical engineer. Certainly, we had thoughts about doing models, but the modeling then was much more primitive than it is now. So I can't speak directly to it because that's outside of my field. I don't know exactly where they were.
I think you have answered my question. If it was more primitive than it is now, wouldn't it be a fair assessment that it would have been more unreliable than it is now?
Back in the day, I think as a generalization, that's probably true because we didn't have the detail and the understanding that we do now. But again, I'm not a biomechanical engineer, so I'm not going to pretend that I know that field.
Fair enough. Dr. Glasnick on Monday also theorized that a plausible alternative in this particular case was an epidural hematoma, the primary injury, that led to the secondary injury of an intracranial venous thrombosis, a clot that eventually was what caused the injury fatal injury to Palin Garner in this case. And all of that came from the minor trauma of hitting the door frame by the father accidentally. What are your thoughts on that?
An epidural?
I said epidural. Am I incorrect in that?
I would think that maybe subdural.
Oh, no. He specifically said epidural hematoma.
I don't really see that.
This moment right here is crucial. What you're hearing is not just agreement, it's a reinforcement of a medical narrative that supports intentional force rather than accidental injury. Notice how the expert expands the motion from simple front and back shaking to a full three-dimensional movement. That's significant. It strengthens the argument that these injuries required extreme force. But here's the bigger question for you. If multiple experienced doctors are aligning on this level of severity, does that make the conclusion more reliable? Or does it risk becoming a one-sided interpretation? Let me know what you think. Should courts rely heavily on expert consensus or question it even more?
Follows epidural. The skull is like a bony sphere, like an eggshell. And you know the membrane inside an eggshell? Think of that like the dura mater. Epidural would be between that membrane and the skull surface. Subdural is between the membrane and the white of the egg. And that could be associated, but when you have a venous sinus thrombosis, there's something that causes that. So to posit that mechanism you just gave me, if we say that it be epidural or subdural, the cause. When you stop the blood flow into the brain, of course, the blood clots in the venous sinus. That's what it does. To get a primary venous sinus thrombosis, you need things like a serious infection, you need dehydration. It doesn't just spontaneously happen.
Okay, understood. Have you ever seen an epidural hematoma on a CAT scan, CT scan?
I have seen epidurals and subdurals for that matter.
Who's most qualified to make a determination from a CAT scan with regard to that epidural hematoma? Let me just ask it this way: would a pediatric neuroradiologist be the most qualified to make that determination?
Absolutely.
Um, Now let's talk about the triad. What you've done is I heard you distinctly refer to it as a diagnostic triad as opposed to just a triad. Why do you make that distinction?
Well, it's important because it's foundational. It's all of medicine. All doctors do the same thing. You go to the doctor, first thing, why are you here? That's history. Then the doc will look at you. That's physical. Then lab testing. We're going to do some blood work. We're going to do some x-rays, CT, whatever it is. We use those methodologies day to day, every day in medicine. So that's how we diagnose things. If you think about what I've heard some in the doubter community, that shaken baby is a thing, will say that subdural hemorrhage, retinal hemorrhage, and brain swelling, cerebral edema, that's a diagnostic triad. Those are three physical findings. That's only 1/3 of the actual way you diagnose something. So it's disingenuous in my book to try to present three physical findings in isolation and to say that medical practitioners diagnose shaken baby syndrome based on those three findings in isolation. And I further say, and have said for many years, it would be medical malpractice if someone were to diagnose based on those three findings in isolation. And I honestly don't believe any responsible practitioner this year, last year, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, ever diagnosed anything based on those any three physical findings in isolation.
I think that's just about all I have for you, Dr. Dow. I guess a couple of wrap-up questions. First, you indicate in your affidavit that, quote, over a dozen multinational professional medical societies have confirmed the validity of the diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome or abusive head trauma in infants. Is that a fair characterization of what you put in your affidavit?
Yes.
Yeah. Is it? And my final question to you is, based on your training experience and your medical knowledge, is the theory behind the diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome or abusive head trauma, does that still remain generally accepted? Let me ask, not only the theory, but the science. Does the science remain generally accepted by the physicians who frequently encounter such ailments?
Absolutely. The people that would see more of these patients than anyone else would be pediatricians because most of the cases are not lethal. Only a minority, fortunately, come to my attention. Um, but not only the pediatric community, but the primitive pathology community, and I think medicine everywhere. It's in the ICD, the International Diagnostic Code book.
And just like that, one of the most critical testimonies in this case comes to an end. Let's break it down. The expert strongly supports the idea that these injuries are consistent with abusive head trauma, emphasizing acceleration and deceleration forces as key causes. At the same time, he admits something incredibly important. Science isn't fully settled, especially when it comes to whether shaking alone is enough or if impact is required. That uncertainty creates tension between medical opinion and legal certainty. Ultimately, the jury already made its decision, but testimony like this shows just how complex and debated these cases really are. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the evidence here points clearly to abuse, or does the scientific uncertainty leave room for doubt? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this breakdown insightful, make sure to hit that like button, share this video with others, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dive courtroom analysis that uncovers the truth behind the headlines.